Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Marsh Watch. We're starting our third session tonight, which is our second bird ID session. I do have to apologize. I'm at the hopefully tail end of a cold, so hopefully I don't have to sneeze too much tonight. I am joining today from Abequit, or Prince Edward Island, which is the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq and is land that's under the Peace and Friendship Treaties. Many of you are likely joining from Newfoundland and Labrador, which are the lands of the Mi'kmaq, Beothuk, Inuit, and Innu. And a great website to discover whose lands you're on, if you aren't aware, is nativeland.ca. So I'd encourage everyone to check that out if you hadn't had the opportunity. For anybody who's new, I am Jenna McDermott. I'll be presenting to you tonight, and my colleague Catherine Dale is here as well. She'll be manning the chat and dealing with any issues that pop up. We both work for Birds Canada, which is a national nonprofit whose mission is to engage people through science to protect the birds we love. And we do have programs all across the country. MarshWatch is just one of many. And there's a lot of opportunity within our programs for the public to become involved in collecting data about birds for science. So this week, pretty easy agenda. We'll be going through a whole bunch of birds, and then we'll have a quick little quiz for fun and time for questions at the end as well. So we'll record the whole thing, but I'll only post the bird ID part. We do have a lot of species that we're going to go through today. The most that we have of any week for the series. This is only half of them. So we're going to be looking at all of these duck species today. I have included some species that aren't super common in Newfoundland and Labrador for a couple of reasons. Sometimes they have really close lookalikes that if you're living elsewhere, or sometimes in the winter we have more ducks around on the ocean, you might see those. So I just wanted to include them so that you have a point of comparison. And some are around during migration as well. So today we are going to be covering the diving ducks. As we talked about last week and a little bit the first week as well, diving ducks are one of the two groupings of ducks that you'll find in any field guide. And they're really built for life underwater. So they have several different ways of getting around or of having that really increased way of getting around underwater. So they do dive underwater for food. That's where they get most of their food from. And because they dive underwater for food, their feet on their body are farther back, which gives them better propulsion while they're kicking underwater and swimming. Additionally, they have small wings for their body size, which again helps them be streamlined underwater, but also makes it difficult for them to take off from water into flight. So you can see that merganser on the bottom picture. They sort of have to run along the top of the water, flapping, flapping, flapping until they can finally take off into flight. And then they also fly faster with quicker wing beats, which is probably a little bit tricky to tell unless you have a diving duck and a dabbling duck beside each other flying. But perhaps as you get more used to watching them in flight, you might notice that sort of distinction. So those are just the reasons that diving ducks are built the way that they are, and the reason that we often don't see them walking around on land because of that location of their feet on their body as well. And so these birds are usually either nesting right along the shoreline of wetlands or other water bodies, or on floating mats of vegetation kind of on the water because they aren't really comfortable walking around. As I mentioned again, the last couple of weeks for ducks and, well, any bird, but ducks especially, it's really helpful to look at where is the white on them. So these species here are all dabbling ducks, of course, that we have covered a couple of them before. But you often see, especially diving ducks, them not in really great lighting situations, or they'll be far off on the water. And a lot of colors will sort of dull into kind of darkness, or you often will see them backlit. So if you just take a look at where the white is on a bird, that's the non-color that will really stand out. And then again, here's just a little overview of dabbler hens versus diver hens. And so we've covered those dabblers last week. The recording will be up by the end of this week if you want to take a look at it again or if you didn't get a chance to watch. And this week we'll be covering the diving hens there on the right. And just one of the major distinctions between the two here, if you see a female duck and you want to tell which grouping it is how much modeling they have in their body feathers. If you see all the dabbling hens on the left there, they have really modeled feathers with a lot of light and dark brown, whereas the diving hens on the right are sort of more uniform in how dark their feathering is. And that's because the dabbling hens are really they're really trying to camouflage with the old vegetation from previous years while they're nesting amongst the old grasses. And the diving hens, again, are living more on the water or closer to water. So it's easier to camouflage with darker feathers. Okay, so we'll get into our birds now for the evening. The first one we'll talk about is the greater scaup. Um, it's a bit of a weird spelling on that name. I know it's always a question how to pronounce it. I've always said Scott, but I've heard it said that way, so that's how we'll go today. This is a medium-sized diving duck. It's nice to think of it as kind of like an Oreo. So it's black on one end and the other end, and then the middle is pale, looking often like white or gray from a distance. And so a lot of the ducks we're going to look at are this combination of black and white, but we're going to be paying attention to really where on the body those two colors are. So again, we have the drake here. He's got a black head, which is iridescent. So in some lights, if it catches the sun, it can be a little purpley or a little green. He has a black breast and rear, but then in the middle, he has white flanks, and then his back is gray. And again, in certain lights or bright sunlight, that will just look white all the way across the middle. He has a bright yellow eye, and that can really stand out from a distance. As you can see in the picture on the bottom left there, the eye is really like popping out. Um, and then its bill is sort of this broad bill that's kind of a bluish gray color. And it's a bit difficult to tell in this picture, but it also has a black nail or like a tiny little tip at the front of it as well, which can be quite prominent in some of them. You can see in the wing shots there that they have a white speculum, which is that patch of color that you often see in the dabbling ducks that we talked about last week. But that patch of white goes all the way out right to the feather tips at the wing tip. And that's on both the male and the female. So you can see it here on the female at the bottom as well. The white goes all the way out through the secondaries, which are closer to the body, and the primaries, which are farther away from the body. The female scaup or the hen is again a medium-sized diving duck. The shape of the females is always the same as the shape of the males for the most part. But she's sort of a gray brown or chocolate brown with some gray mixed in a little bit. And the head is darker than the body. So as you can see in the picture on the top, it's really easy to tell with that lighting that it's kind of a darker brown on the top of her head, and the body is sort of a grayish brown. The female greater scaup, this is a really good mark to look for, is that bold white patch at the base of the bill. And it will always be there, but it does come in a little bit of a variable amount. So that picture on the bottom left, you can see it's not quite as prominent as the one on the top, but it's still there, and its presence is a mark for a greater scaup female. Sometimes they can get a little bit of a pale patch on their cheek, as you can see on the photo on the top. That's when the feathers get a little bit more worn. They'll get fresh feathers in the late summer, early fall. And so by the time summer comes again, the spring, they might have some worn feathers on the face that are looking paler. Again, the female has a yellow eye, but it's not quite as brilliant as the males. It can be a bit brown, so it doesn't stand out quite as well. Then she has the same bill with this broad bill that's kind of a blue-gray color. Greater scaup typically are diving for invertebrates. So you'll see them popping underwater, popping up in a different spot. They're eating things from the bottom of the pond or wherever they're feeding things like small bivalves, snails, crustaceans, the insects and larvae of aquatic insects, and then some plant matter as well, but for the most part, they're eating insects of some sort. They live in open lands in the open tundra, and they'll nest in long grasses on the edge of fresh water. So you're not going to find these in wooded forest lands, but you'll find them in open lands instead. And they do like having a lot of emergent vegetation that they can hide in. And so that's that vegetation that's standing up on the edges of the water, like bulrushes or cattails and that sort of thing, or even tall grasses. So here's a range map of where they are. So they're all across North America. And again, since we're looking at sort of the treeless zones, they're higher up, farther north. But we have had some on the island of Newfoundland as well during the breeding season. So there is possibility that they're out there in the more peatland areas as well. There is another bird that looks super the exact same almost as a greater scaup. So the greater scaup is the one we just talked about. And then there's also a lesser scaup, which you can see in the bottom picture. They look incredibly, incredibly similar, especially if they're at any sort of distance. They have both that same iridescent black head, so it can look a little greenish or purplish depending on the lighting. And they both have that brilliant yellow eye. They both have black and white with this paler in the middle. And the lesser scaup does look a little bit darker on the back, but again, if you have a lot of sunlight or if it's at a distance, that can be really hard to tell. And so the main point of difference is super minute, and we're talking about the shape of the head. So this is just sort of a note that takes a lot of practice and a lot of looking at scaup to be able to tell the difference. And so we are looking at where the peak of the head is when they're sort of at rest rather than actively diving. So the greater scaup you can see at the top has the tallest point of the head nearer to the bill, sort of above the eye, whereas the lesser scaup on the bottom there has the tallest point of the head near to the back of its head. That's really difficult to tell, so don't be alarmed if you're finding that really hard. In flight, it's a little bit easier if you can get a look at their wings as they're going by. So the greater scaup on the right there, or sorry, on the top, has the white that goes all the way across the wing feathers, as I mentioned earlier, so through the secondaries and the primaries, whereas the lesser scaup on the bottom has the white patch really only in the secondaries, and then it peters out to a little bit grayer in the wingtips. So that's for both the hen and the drake of both species, and that's a really great thing to look at if you can get a chance to see them flying. Here are the hens of each of them. Again, we're talking about really similar looking birds. You can look at the shape of the head again. Even on the picture on the top there, I can't really see much of a peak at all on that greater scaup. But the lesser scaup, you can see that it's at the back of the head. The greater scaup female also does have a more prominent white area at the base of the bill compared to the lesser scaup on the bottom. But again, that amount of white is variable sort of on both, so it could be a bit of a gradient and it can be difficult to tell. And a lot of the time people just say they saw a species of scaup if they're making a checklist, and that's really, really common because they're so difficult. The good thing is, though, that we're mostly expecting greater scaup out on the East Coast. Sometimes in the winter we get a little bit of a mixture. And this is the map for the lesser scaup. So they're more of a Western species, but again, they can be around sometimes. So I just wanted to bring them to light so you were aware. Okay, the ringneck duck is our next species, and it's one that I really like a lot. You find them around the island of Newfoundland a fair bit, and in Labrador as well. And we'll look at their map in a few slides. But again, we have a medium-sized diving duck. They have a bit of a peak on their head, kind of like we were looking at with those scaup just a second ago. And a really good mark for the ringneck duck is that dark bill with a white ring around it. So I know their name is ring-necked duck, and you can see in the little tiny picture on the top left that they do have a ring around their neck of sort of a darker, a lighter brown. But that ring is incredibly difficult to see, and you're barely ever going to see it in real life. They were named that way after somebody had hunted one, and then they decide to name it that because they could see the ring on the neck quite clearly at that point. But when they're alive and swimming around, the ring is quite hidden, as you can see on the one sitting on the water there. And so really they should have been called the ring-billed duck, I think, but here we are. Um, Again, we have this black and white diving duck. But rather than having a pale middle section, they have black on their back. So that's an important distinction between the scaup we were just talking about and the ringneck duck. Um, but again, yeah, they have an iridescent head, so it can show a little green or a little purple depending on the light. They have gray flanks, and you can see just at sort of their shoulder area, they have a little white spur that goes up towards the neck. That's a really good marker for ringneck duck as well. And they have an orange yellow eye, so that will stand out at a distance too. The ringneck duck likes to live in shallow wetlands, fens and bogs. They don't mind if there's trees around the edges, but they also live in sort of more open areas. They're um, a bit more of an opportunist, I suppose. Here's the hen. Again, we are looking at a medium-sized diving duck with a peaked head, that peak towards the back. She has that same dark bill with a white ring that we looked at on the male just a second ago. So that's a great mark for males and females of the ringneck duck. You can see that from pretty far away, which is really nice. Generally, she's sort of brown or reddish brown overall. Her back is a little bit darker than the rest of her body. And another nice mark for her is that she has a white eye ring, and it kind of looks a little bit like spectacles because there's often a little white line that goes behind it as well, sort of like the arm of a glasses. So she's got a white ring around the bill and then those white spectacles. She has a pale base to her bill as well, and a dark brown eye, so that's not going to stand out at any sort of distance. The ringneck duck is, as I mentioned, sort of opportunistic in both where they might live, but also what they might eat. And so they are a diving duck, but they will also do a little bit of dabbling because they're living in shallow wetlands. So if they're going near the edges, they'll just dabble instead of diving down. And they're eating a whole variety of things like seeds, tubers, plant matter of any sort, as well as aquatic insects. Things like leeches, which is nice to have someone eating them, I'm sure, snails and clams. So they're sort of going for it all. And here's the male display call. It's not super memorable, so that was just mostly for interest's sake, but that's what they sound like. And as I mentioned, the ringneck duck is pretty common around Newfoundland and Labrador, as well as throughout North America. And their range map there shows them sort of cut off from the northern part of the island of Newfoundland, but they are kind of widespread. So this is maybe not quite up to date. We'll do a quick little comparison of ringneck duck versus the scaup, those first ones that we looked at, because they both are black and white diving ducks, and they both have that really brilliant yellow eye. So they can sometimes be confusing if you're not paying close attention. The key point of difference is, of course, that the ringneck duck has a black back, whereas the greater scaup has a gray back, looking sometimes white in the light. Again, the ringneck duck has that ring around the bill and that white spur that goes up towards the shoulder. And the greater scaup and the lesser scaup as well, by extension, have that gray back, a blue bill, a blue-gray bill, and a fully white flank. So look at the color of the back is really the most important marker here. And here's just a little example of, let's say we have a little group of ducks, black and white diving ducks. You see them all diving. And this is actually a mix of ringneck duck and lesser scaup. So by extension, the greater scaup will look very similar. And so let's just take a look at what we have here. Um, there are several ducks with black backs. So we know that those are ringneck duck males. You can even see the ring on the bill of that one on the left a little bit poking out from behind that other duck. We also have some other ducks that are sort of black and white Oreo style ducks, which are pointed to the arrow there. They have gray on their back. And so we know in this case that they're lesser scaup. And then we have some female ducks over on the right-hand side there. And you can see that they have both a ring around their bill, those two on the top, as well as kind of spectacles around their eyes. So those are ringneck duck females. And then the one in front, the last one, we have no idea what it is other than it's a diving duck because we can't really see any markers on her that will show us what she is. So that's just another note that a lot of the time you might not be able to tell what a duck is to species necessarily. And that's okay. It's common for anybody who's looking at a whole bunch of ducks. Even to get them down to diving ducks is great. All right, here's our next species then, the long-tailed duck. Most people are familiar probably with their winter plumage, which I'll show you in a couple of slides, but this is their summer plumage. Most ducks only have sort of that eclipse plumage, which is when the males put the female plumage on for part of the late summer so that they can molt all their wing feathers, as well as the breeding plumage. But long-tailed ducks actually have a third one, so they'll have the summer plumage, non-breeding plumage, and the eclipse plumage. So this is their summer plumage. This is the drake. Luckily, his name is good in that he has a long tail. So that is really nice. It often sticks up out of the water and is easy to see, but sometimes can lie a little bit flatter. But most of the time you'll be able to pick that out. This is a small diving duck, so it's somewhat smaller than the last three species we were looking at. And it doesn't have any color in the wings, it's just fully dark. So no white patch or anything like that. As you can see here, the drake is pretty fancy looking. Sort of dark brown all over the back. He has a big white patch on his face, sort of round at the front and pointed near the back of the head. Long tail feathers, as I mentioned before, which is a great mark. And then the other really good mark for them is this dark bill with a pink patch on it. So all of the males will have that even if they're juveniles. They'll have some sort of pink on their bill. They have a white belly, which a lot of these diving ducks do have. But in the case of the long-tailed duck, it sort of extends a little bit farther up on the rear end so that you can see it behind the wing. So it can look a little bit like white flanks, depending how they're holding their wing. Or they can look like they have brown flanks, depending if they're holding their wing farther down. Then you can also see that male on the top has kind of this fluffy white cap. That's pretty variable as well. So the one on the bottom has much less of that. And so that's not a really great mark to use, but they can have that definitely. This is the female. So again, this is the summer plumage. She's a small diving duck as well, with all dark wings. You can see the wings a little bit on that bottom picture on the right. So no color on there. Again, sort of dark brown all over the top. But she does have a pale face patch as well. It's smaller than on the male, but it is quite distinct, with a point at the back of the head. And she also has a small dark bill, but as you notice, doesn't have any pink on it. She has a pale ring around her neck as well, which you can see in certain postures, and a white belly, which again, you could see if she's stretching, like in the bottom right photo, but also will show near the tail as well as if she had white flanks. So that's a good mark for the long-tailed duck, both the male and the female. I mentioned that they have a different plumage in the winter. So this is the male on top and the female there on the bottom in the winter plumage. Luckily, the long-tailed duck drake has those long tail feathers all year round, so you can see them sticking up really nicely on the top photo. Um, he also often has these really fancy looking feathers laying along his back, and that is pretty common in both the winter and the summer plumage. So in the winter time, these birds sort of flip their facial markings and have a white head and neck with a dark face patch in the winter, whereas in the summer they had a dark head and neck with a white face patch. But you see the drake there, he still has that dark bill with the pink section on it. And now he has a dark breast and wings and a white flank as well, which is sort of hidden under his wing in that picture. The female there on the bottom has a dark back and wings, that white flank as well, showing near the back especially. And she has a dark bill without the pink, same as she had in the summer. And then she has that dark face patch, and a little bit of brown on top of the head as well. So this is a plumage that you can get long-tailed ducks throughout sort of anywhere on the ocean during the winter in large groups. And so this is the plumage they'll be having sort of this time of year. Here's a couple pictures more of their breeding plumage. They are diving for insects and crustaceans, and they can dive really deep. So they're not sort of shallow divers like the ring-necked duck was. Um, they're going for things like the aquatic insects and their larvae. In the winter, they're going for small crustaceans, especially when they're in salt water. They'll eat things like fish eggs, and they'll also have some vegetable matter as well. Long-tailed ducks are also open land lovers, like in tundra areas, or they'll be in perhaps open peatlands. So they'll go for places like tundra, ponds, and bogs, and they're really a subarctic and Arctic bird. They have a pretty interesting call, so let's take a listen. It's a little bit quiet. You might need to turn your sound up for it. I'll play it once more. So that's the long-tailed duck display call. I'd love to hear one in real life. Hopefully you all get the chance sometime. As I mentioned, they are sort of an Arctic and subarctic breeder. They do have a circumpolar distribution, so they are all around the globe in those Arctic and subarctic regions. And they are found throughout Labrador, and occasionally on Newfoundland as well, in the Long Range Mountains, even though that's not on the map there, but range maps are not always super accurate. Yeah, so that was the long-tailed duck. We'll move on now to the scoters. So we have three scoters. The first one is the surf scoter. Scoters have often a really distinctive shape into the bill. So if you look at that surf scoter's head there, you notice he has a really large knobbly bill. It sort of slopes directly up into the forehead rather than having a bill then going up into the head. It's kind of all in one big slope, and that's kind of a scoter thing. Pretty similar to eiders, if you're familiar with eiders. Surf scoters are a medium-sized diving duck. Again, they have all dark wings. You can see in the photo on the bottom left of the flying one. There's no color on there to speak of. And the drake here is has got a fully black body. He has a bright white eye, so that'll be visible from a distance. And then the really key marks here are that big white patch on his forehead, and then that big white patch on the back of the head. And you can see them from a couple of different angles in these photos, and they, of course, will stand out from any sort of distance and in low light conditions as well. So they're really nice. And he's got this bright orange and white bill, which is kind of funny looking, but it's really, really distinctive. The female is far less fancy, as we've come to know for our ducks. Again, she is a medium-sized diving duck with all dark wings as well. And she has that same large knobby bill that slopes into the forehead, but it's not colorful for her. It's just a dark bill. She's all over brown. And the important thing to note for her is where those two patches of white are on her face. So she has a white oval patch behind her eye. And then she has a vertical white patch behind the bill that sort of goes upright and follows the edge of the bill up her face. So those are the important marks for her, those two marks on the face and the direction of the one by the bill. Surf scoters are diving invertebrate seekers as well. And during the summer, when they're on freshwater, they'll be eating a lot of benthic invertebrates. So those are just invertebrates that are down at the bottom, um, in the mud and stuff at the bottom of whatever water they are in. And then during the winter, they're usually on the ocean, so they're eating things like saltwater mussels and crustaceans, and they sort of swallow them whole. So you can see that female there up on top, she is eating a clam whole. They just suck them back, and their gizzard will sort of break up all of that shell and that sort of thing, and it's no problem for them, which is pretty crazy. Surf scoters in the breeding season are nesting in shallow wetlands or small lakes in the boreal forest. So they actually nest in wooded areas that are near the water, on the ground. And so obviously the female will be walking a little bit around during nesting season, but she's going to be pretty awkward about it. And they actually like to live in um, these shallow wetlands or small lakes that have not a lot of vegetation in them, and also not a lot of fish, which is interesting, but fish are a big competitor for all of those aquatic insects and their larvae, which a lot of these breeding ducks are really reliant on for growing their chicks. So a lot of them like lakes and ponds that don't have many fish. So surf scoters are found across North America. Again, they're really widespread in the West there, but we don't have any records of breeding on the island of Newfoundland, but it is possible, especially in those more remote areas. Someone may just not found them. They are found throughout Labrador. And again, they're looking for shallow freshwater in wooded areas. Our next scoter is the black scoter, which I think is honestly just so cute. He's like a little duck with a cute little face. Again, he's medium-sized diving duck, all dark wings, as you can see in the flying photo there on the bottom. Um, and he's got a kind of short tail, which often is held sticking up a little bit, like that photo on the bottom there, on the bottom left. He has a pretty round head. Maybe that's why he looks like a little fresh-faced duckling or something. And he has a dark eye, so you're not having that bright yellow or white eye that we've seen in the other species today. The drake here has a totally black body. There's not a drop of white on him or any other color other than that bright orange patch on the top of the bill. And that is going to be the key marker for a black scoter male. Let's just take a listen to his display call, just for interest's sake. So it's really high pitched. It's so funny because when you grow up, you think ducks just say quack, but really most of them actually say a lot of different things. So that's the black scoter male. And then here we have the hen. Again, a medium-sized diving duck, all dark wings. You can see she's bedding them in the bottom photo. And she has that same short tail, but it's kind of sitting flat on the water there, so you can't really tell. A rounded shape to the head and a dark eye again, as well as a dark bill. The hen is brown overall, as we've seen for all of these female ducks. And the most important thing to note for the black scoter female is that black cheek patch. And so I know that we are looking at a lot of different pale cheek patches for a lot of these ducks. Um, but it's really the size of them, the shape of them, and where they are on the face that is going to make the big difference. So for the black scoter, it's sort of covering the entire face and even going down the neck. And it kind of gives her a look like she has a dark cap on her head. So it's sort of a two-toned face. Here we have the male and the female in the same photo. So you can see that patch on the female's face really well and the orange bill for the males. Again, they're diving duck, of course. They are eating mostly aquatic insects during the summer. And then in the winter, they'll also be on the ocean. So they're eating a lot of mollusks. And then again, they'll swallow those whole. Black scoters are found in open tundra areas with ponds and lakes. You can find them throughout Labrador. We had our first few breeding records in on the island in Newfoundland during our breeding bird atlas during the last few years, which is really exciting in the long range mountains. And there's likely more of them around in those open lands, but they are in really remote areas, so we probably just haven't found them. Okay, our last scoter is the white-winged scoter, and it's not really found breeding in Newfoundland and Labrador. It's more of a Western species, but it can be found sometimes during winter on the ocean in these large groups of ducks, of diving ducks. So I thought I'd mention it just on this one slide, so you're aware that there's another scoter out there. Um, the male is up on top and the hen is on the bottom photo, with a hen in the flying photo as well, or the stretching one. So again, we have a all dark body for the male, but he has a really stark white comma mark that's under the eye, which shows up really well against the darkness of his body. And then also, luckily, the white-winged scoter is named well, and so they do have a white patch on their wing, and often even when they're floating, you can see that white sitting out for both the male and the female, a lot of the time. The white-winged scoter is also much larger than the others, but again, without point of comparison, that's probably difficult to tell. Sorry, back up to the male. Other than the white comma under his eye and that little white wing patch, he has a pretty lumpy, sort of colorful looking bill, which is a little bit funky looking. The hen on the bottom there, again, is mostly brown, but she does have that white wing patch showing, and she has two marks on her face as well. In this case, they are both pale ovals. So the one by the bill is an oval shape rather than going up and down like we had earlier. And here's just their range map. So as I mentioned, they're really a more western species, but you can find them out east during the winter. Okay, moving on to our next birds, we have, I'm just going to do a comparison of these ones as we go together because they're so similar. So we have the common goldeneye and the Barrow's goldeneye. Again, these are both diving ducks. These are the males here on this slide. They're a bit medium-sized. They both have short triangular bills. They both have a bright yellow eye, like we saw in the scaup and the ringneck duck. And they both have a black iridescent head. So again, with the light, that can show up as a little bit green or a little bit purple. So similarly to the ringneck duck and the scaup that we had at the beginning of tonight's session, we have birds here that are mostly black and white. They have dark heads and bright yellow eyes, but the golden eyes have a white patch on their face for the males. So the common golden eye on the left there, the white patch on the face is round, it's just a big circle. For the Barrow's golden eye on the right, the white patch is a crescent, and the shapes for these are always like that, so they're not really variable, which is nice. And they're going to be a really great marker for telling these two apart. The body color for the goldeneye, or sorry, they're both goldeneyes. For the common goldeneye is going to be more white because there's only these little black stripes up near the top of the side. On the Barrow's goldeneye on the right there, there's far more black. So you really just have this kind of black spur going down the shoulder and then little white spots rather than mostly white with little black lines. And then a little bit more into minutia of shape, which can be hard to see based on what direction they're facing, of course. The common goldeneye's forehead really gradually goes into the bill, whereas the Barrow's goldeneye is a pretty sharp, sort of almost 90-degree angle between the forehead, which is very steep, and the bill being attached to it. So we'll see the same shape for the females as well. They look incredibly similar. They're both, again, medium-sized diving ducks. They both have a short triangular bill, a yellow iris, looks a little bit more white in the common goldeneye, but I think that's just a lighting thing. And then they have a brown head compared to a gray back and body. So they do have a bit of distinction between the head and body color. On the common goldeneye on the left, you see the bill is mostly black. On the Barrow's goldeneye on the right, you'll see the bill is mostly yellow. Um, that's the best marker for telling these two apart, as far as I know. So I think a lot of the time, unless they're paired up with a male, it can be really difficult to tell if you have a common goldeneye female or a Barrow's goldeneye female. They do have that forehead shape similar to the males, where it's a bit more gradual with the common goldeneye and very steep with the Barrows. But that can, of course, be difficult to tell even in these two photos right here. This is the song of the common goldeneye. It's quite similar to the Barrows as well. So that's really quiet. I don't know if you can hear it, but I hope so. The Barrow's goldeneye sounds nearly the same. I couldn't find a recording that I could use on here, but you could look it up online if you're interested. The Barrow's just sort of clips off each note. And goldeneyes are nice. A lot of the diving ducks actually, when they're flying, they have sort of a wing whistle. So if you hear them, or if they're flying by, you'll hear them go through. Here's one just flying along. You can hear that wing whistle getting closer. There it goes away now. And so that's not a vocalization, that's just the sound of the air going past their wing feathers. We're listening again. Okay. Um, Onto their flight photos. It's nice that they have also a little bit of a different markings on the wings, the common versus Barrow's goldeneye. So the common goldeneye has white on both the forewing and the speculum, for both the male and the female. This is a picture of the males. And then the Barrows on the right there, it has mostly just white on the speculum with only a little bit on the forewing. So if you see them flying, you'll be able to tell the difference as well there. Oh, and I circled that, but forgot to show you. Um, they're pretty similar in their sort of habitat niche, ecological niche as well. They're both invertebrate-seeking divers. They like things like aquatic invertebrates, much like we've seen for most of these ducks today. They're eating things like insects, mollusks, and crustaceans. Sometimes they'll have an amphibian or two. They'll eat fish eggs and just a little bit of vegetation as well. They like freshwater, forested wetlands. They're actually cavity nesters, so they will use old woodpecker cavities and that sort of thing to nest in. And so they are always going to be around forested freshwater for breeding. And again, they are interested in small amounts of vegetation and not very many fish so that their young can be safe, and also there's a lot of insects available. And this is the common goldeneye range. They're throughout North America in the boreal forest. So we find them both in Newfoundland and Labrador. And then the Barrow's golden eye is far less widespread. It's not known to breed on the island, but it's thought to be quite likely, and it is found in northern Labrador. Okay, our last grouping of ducks today are the mergansers. And so we have three species of mergansers that we'll talk about in the next couple of minutes. Um, Mergansers are a particular grouping of diving ducks, and they specifically feed on fish. Um, and they have this really cool thin bill with these teeth all along the edge of it, like you could see in that common merganser on the right with its beak wide open. And they use that to catch the fish, and the teeth are obviously important for not having them slip away. So all of the mergansers are going to have this really particular bill shape, and that's a really great way to know that you at least are looking at a merganser, even if you can't tell anything else about it. The first one we'll go through is the hooded merganser. It's a pretty small diving duck, and the male here looks um, really fancy. So he's hard to mistake, especially when he has his crest up. He has a black, narrow bill, that merganser bill, but it's a dark black one. And the male has this big white crest on the back of his head. So his head is fully black, except for this big white patch on the crest. Um, Depending on how he's holding his feathers, that crest might be sort of flattened down like you can see in the pictures on the right there. So if he's relaxed, he might have his feathers hanging down, or if his head is wet, then you won't necessarily see that humongous crest, but he'll always have that white patch that you can see. Um, Obviously, when they're displaying, like those three on the bottom left, the crest is going to be up and ready to go so the females can see it. And this is actually a great time of year to be looking at displaying ducks because this is when they're sort of doing their courtship. And a lot of diving ducks have these crazy displays where they're throwing their head back and forth and making their display noises, and it's quite a thing to see. The hooded merganser male here also, sorry, has kind of orange-brown flanks as well, but the head, of course, is going to be the most obvious mark for him. Hooded mergansers live in small wooded ponds, so take a look at a picture of that later. But they make this sort of rattly growl for their display call. It's that low, low growl that you can hear in the recording. I realize there's quite a few different things. It almost sounds like a frog. So that's the hooded merganser display sound, and this is sort of its ideal habitat to breed in. A lot of places like beaver ponds or other shallow wetlands like marshes and swamps. Um, they are also cavity nesters, so they're always looking for forest or trees around. And again, they're not really interested in areas that have a lot of big fish because then their young could get snapped up. This is the female hooded merganser. She's a small diving duck again. She has that narrow merganser bill, but instead of being all dark, it has some yellow on the bottom and dark above. Um, the female has that big crest like the male, but instead of being black and white, it's sort of this brown with frosted tips, like we're going back to the 90s. And she's kind of brown overall, but she'll always have that crest, even when she has it relaxed, like in the photo on the bottom. The hooded merganser, I know we just spent a fair bit of time looking at them. They're not really common in Newfoundland and Labrador. There have been some pairs across the province, and some successful broods on the island. So they are around, just they're not super common, but definitely good to keep an eye out for, and super fun if you happen to come across one. Okay, our last two Ducks for tonight are the common and red-breasted mergansers. I'm showing them again on the same slides because they are not actually breeding in wetlands. So um, we're going to cover them because you can see them a lot of the time in the winter on the ocean, and you can see them across Newfoundland and Labrador during the summer, but they're actually using large lakes that are deep and filled with fish. So um, anyway, here they are. The common merganser is on the top here. Both of these birds have that red merganser bill, that skinny merganser bill. They both have a dark iridescent green head. Right now in these lightings, they look black, of course, as all the iridescent ones do. The common merganser up top there is a black and white diver. So we've had a lot of black and white divers tonight, but if you look specifically at the bill, you'll know this is a merganser and thus a common merganser. So he has all white flanks and neck, and then a black back. Really sharp lines, looks very dashing. The red-breasted merganser is kind of a wild, wild-looking duck with that bright red eye and that big shaggy crest. The big shaggy crest is quite prominent in this photo, but it's not always looking quite that long and fancy, especially if the head is wet or not all of their feathers are that long. So it's not the best marker to use. The best marker to use is sort of that combination of the dark head, the merganser bill, a white collar that goes down to a rusty or brown breast. So that combination of stripes along the front half of the body, along with the merganser bill, is going to give you your identification for him. He also has gray flanks and sort of a white wing patch that you can see as well. Here's the females of those two. Again, we have common on the top, red-breasted on the bottom. They look pretty similar to each other, but there's a couple of key marks to really pay attention to. They both have that merganser bill. It's red for them, and they both have a brown head and a gray body. But the common merganser, you're really looking for that sharp contrast that's between the brown of the head and the gray of the neck. So there's really a sharp line there that is having one color on top and one color on the bottom. She also has a white chin patch that again is a very sharp contrast to the brown of the head. If we look at the red-breasted merganser at the bottom, you can see that the same sort of colors are there, but it's all blended together. There's none of this sharp contrasting lines. On the neck, there's the brown of the head that just sort of gradually turns into the gray of the neck. And then there is often some paleness around the beak or on the chin, but it is not in that sharp contrast with a fine line between the color of the brown of the head. So that's your key marks for the females here. The common merganser female often has a bit of a crest on her head, shaggy. Again, that's pretty variable and depending if she's got a wet head or not, might not be there. And the red-breasted merganser can have a little bit as well, but the common merganser female often has a larger crest. Here they are side by side. So the common mergansers there on the bottom, you can see that really sharp contrasting line between the dark brown head and the pale gray of the neck with that really sharp line, as well as the chin patch. And the red-breasted merganser up top there does have some of that paleness in the face, but there's no sharp line, and it's all blended together quite gradually. Common mergansers are found across North America, throughout the boreal forest and also below. And they're found in Newfoundland and Labrador specifically, but not up in the north. And then red-breasted mergansers are also found even more widespread, and so we'll find them all across the province as well as all of the other provinces. Okay, and so that was our last species. So just a quick slide about identifying female ducks. I know that they all look super similar, and we've gone through sort of their key marks. But again, it can be really difficult to tell if they're at any sort of distance or if the lighting is not great. So even if you can tell them between a dabbling duck and a diving duck, that's a great start. Um, it's really great to learn the shape of them with the shape of the head, the shape of the body, and the bill from the males. Often they'll be paired up, especially early in the season. Take a look specifically at the patterns on the head. And then for the dabblers that we were looking at last week, especially the wing color, the speculum, can be really, really helpful if you can get a look at that wing. For our females that we had today, we'll just do a quick overview of their key marks here. So they are obviously have a lot of similarities between them, but there are some differences. So the first thing that we pay attention to for many of them is if they have a face patch of some sort. And so here's a whole bunch that have a very specific face patch. The greater scaup has that big white patch behind the bill. I'm just going to go left to right, top to bottom. The long-tailed duck has a white patch that's sort of triangular shape with a point at the back. And also the long-tailed duck, she has that sort of white at the rear as well. The surf scoter has two face patches. One is an oval behind the eye, and one is an up and down behind the bill. The black scoter has a big pale face patch that goes all the way down the neck, making it sort of have a capped appearance. And the white winged scoter also has two face patches. One is an oval behind the eye, and one is an oval behind the bill, rather than an up and down behind the bill. And then also the white winged scoter luckily has that white wing often peeking out. We also have some with different looking bills. So we have the mergansers, of course, that we just talked about that always have that thin merganser bill at the bottom there. We have the ringneck duck at the top who has the white ring around the bill, and then she'll also have those white spectacles on. The hooded merganser has that big crest with frosted tip. The common merganser has those sharp contrasting lines between the neck and the head color, as well as the chin patch. And the red-breasted merganser has the same colors, but all of that blended line together. And then that leaves, I think, just this one left, the common goldeneye, and by extension, the Barrow's goldeneye, who has that bright yellow eye, and a brown head but gray body as well. So again, just be patient with yourself as you're learning your ducks and your female ducks specifically. Sometimes you just won't know what they are, but as you take a look at more, you'll get to be more comfortable with all these sort of minute differences. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our species ID. I do have a little quiz that folks who want to stick around can do. It's just 5 questions, just for fun. It's anonymous. I'd like to just thank Wildlife Habitat Canada, who has funded this series through their granting program that is provided from the sale of the Canadian Wildlife Habitat Conservation Stamp, or duck stamp. As always, you can get in touch with us via email up at the top there. You can find the recordings for these at the website just below. And you can follow Birds Canada on social media if you so desire.